Good evening. Hi, it's Mike. It's February 25th, 2009. I could try to do my Mr. Smith voice, or hello, Mr. Anderson, but I won't bother today. I don't have a throat thing anymore, so I mean that's the main reason that I was sounding a bit bizarre like that previously. Never mind. Anyway, good evening. I have in my sweaty little palms a transcript of last night's address from Dr. Barack Obama. He has a legal doctorate to the United States Congress. Basically saying, yep, everything's a mess, and hopefully we'll get things fixed. Now, one of the things that's in there, I mean, I didn't listen to it last night. I went to bed. I had better things to do. But I listened to it this morning, first thing, and I printed off the transcript so I could read it at work today. And one thing that jumps out right at the end is quite telling. Basically, it gets into, in words and deeds, we are showing the world that a new era of engagement has begun, for we know that America cannot meet the threats of this century alone, but the world cannot meet them without America. Now, which threats is he talking about? Now, some commentators have suggested that he's actually talking about trade and trade agreements. Maybe that G20 thing's actually going to work. We'll have to see. Wait and see. We cannot shun the negotiating table, nor ignore the foes or forces that could do us harm. Okay, so foes or forces. Well, that's an interesting turn of phrase. We are instead called to move forward with a sense of confidence and candor that serious times demand. And then he goes on about we have to get Israel to the negotiation table, but also to go on about we will strengthen old alliances, forge new ones, and use all elements of our national power. Okay, so that's, again, interesting phrases. And he's trying to understand what he's actually going on about. Then he gets into, so that's previous to this, and he says, and to respond to an economic crisis. So everything else is without regard to the economic crisis. Weird words. Anyway. And to respond to an economic crisis that is global in scale, we are working with the nations of the G20 to restore confidence in our financial system, avoid the possibility of escalating protectionism. Okay, so he is actually going to think about Doha. Now, one thing that should be pointed out is the World Trade Organization president was in Japan, and apparently he's worked out a deal with Japan, so they're going to sign up to the Doha round. Because Japan was complaining about the fact that, you know, they were going to get screwed because of the strength of the yen and so forth. Well, that's not an issue anymore, but, you know. And their main big thing is, of course, they export a lot. Although their exports have fallen dramatically today. It was reported today their exports have dropped 45% in the last quarter, which is a huge amount of economic turmoil. Anyway, but we'll get back to that in the other report. And then he said, okay, and spur demand for American goods in markets across the globe. Okay, so basically, there is a good chance this G20 thing's going to work with regards to protectionism and getting the states signed up to the World Trade Organization. I think that's where this is heading. Now, the big question, of course, is financial regulation and whether he's going to allow or push through the financial regulation in time for the G20 meeting. That's going to be a tough one. Much harder sell than agricultural subsidies being dropped. Now, there is one thing at the end here, when he's talking about, you know, those of us gathered here tonight, so he's talking to Congress as opposed to the American people, have been called to govern in extraordinary times. It is a tremendous burden, but it's always also a great privilege. Okay, now this is the important sentence. One that has been entrusted to few generations of Americans. So basically he's saying, in a nutshell, small number of people make all the decisions for America. And if you didn't figure that one out by now, he just told you in the speech. Now, the thing about this speech, it's a very good speech. This is one of the best speeches I've heard from a president for many years. And it follows a particular pattern. Now, of course, Obama has speechwriters, but more importantly, Obama is a graduate of Harvard. And the Harvard Business School prints little books. One of the books they printed was this one, Business Communication. Now, for my last job, I had to do a lot of presentations, and indeed this new job, this current job I've got, but I have to do a lot of presentations, and after a while, doing presentations gets really boring. Because most presentations nowadays follow the pattern of, tell your audience what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you're telling them, and then at the end, tell them what you told them. And that is incredibly tedious. Now, particularly if you see a lot of presentations, okay? So what happens, and what a lot of powerful speakers will do, is they'll reorganize this and use an entirely different technique. And the technique is called the Greek way, or the Greek presentation style. Basically, the ancient Greeks, they used to stand up and yak away. The politicians would yak, 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 and they'd all yak, 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 and then they'd come to some kind of agreement and decide on things. And they got sick and tired of the standard, tell them what you're doing, tell them it, and then tell them what you just told them. Because that's really dull. So, what they did is came up with a different kind of style. And if we look at the speech from last night, it is a perfect example of the Greek presentation style. So if you guys have never heard of this and you're interested in speaking or speech or oratory, this is a good style. And get the book. The book's really handy. Gives you all kinds of hints on how to do it. But anyway, if we quickly skim through this, how this all fits together. So the first thing you do is, in the introduction, you talk about the audience. Okay? Now the audience would be the American people in that particular part of it. I mean, he's talking to Congress, but he pretty much knows that most of America is watching him, and indeed lots of people around the world. So talk about the audience, and indeed he does that. He says, we the American people, blah, blah, blah. Talk about the previous speaker. Well, in this case, you can't really talk about the previous speaker, but he can talk about the previous administration and say that he's building upon, or he's improving upon what they did, or the mess they made, whatever. Talk about the event, and of course he goes into great detail about, why are we here? Why are we at this junction in time, and what's been happening with America? Talk about a moment in history, and look back. And in one point, I believe he does reference Teddy Roosevelt, and he also references FDR, or I think he references FDR, but he definitely got Roosevelt in here. Talk about the place. Okay, so wherever you are. So talk about Congress and how important Congress is to solving these problems. Okay, then get to the point of the speech. Then you go through a narrative section where you talk about, what you've done to get up to this point. Then you bring out the arguments. So these are, okay, this is the argument against what you're doing. And then you refute each argument in turn. So you say, right, this is what this person says. I say this, and this is why. Big strength. And then you get to the conclusion and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. I've already told you, here's the arguments against. I've already refuted all of them. Here's why it's going to work. Everybody now, get up. And you can use all kinds of different rhetorical devices. And in fact, the book goes into some really good ones. That, the antithesis. In Rhetoric, antithesis is placing of a sentence in one of its parts in opposition to another to capture the listener's attention. So, anyway, if you want to do presentations, study that speech. That speech was an excellent speech, and I've included a link to it and to a video of it. If you want to become a powerful speaker, learn this technique, because this technique will swing audiences like you wouldn't believe, and it will give them great confidence. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't look like Dow Jones was listening. The markets weren't listening terribly well. At this particular moment, the Dow Jones is down. I think it was 1.5% was what I just saw. Yeah, 1.8% roughly. S&P is around the same level. Yeah, it's not looking too great, but that's due to other things like news out of Japan and so forth. So. But if you want to learn how to give a great speech and how to motivate people and get people to see how you're doing things, get this book or study it online. It's called The Greek Presentation Style. You would not believe how powerful that particular style can be. Okay, everyone. Peace, love, understanding. Think about things. Learn some new things. This kind of technique can be very useful in motivating a large crowd. Okay, I will talk to you with one more report about the news today. Thanks very much. Thanks for watching.